When I did implement the DJI LiDAR system, while I did get it to work, that made this camera incredibly, the footprint of this camera was just huge. Towards the end of last year, of 2023, I picked up the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and implemented it in my studio setup so that you don't have to. Now it's totally possible that you may watch this video and come to the conclusion that this camera is everything you've been looking for and checks all the boxes for you. And if so, then great. But throughout this video, I'll be sharing my experience why, as of right now, this camera isn't a good fit for me. Let's dig in. So, full disclaimer, when I picked up this camera in November of last year, 2023, I had been lusting over this camera for about 4 or 5 years. That's right. This thing is nice. And the reason why I had an eye on it is because 4 or 5 years ago when this initially came out, well, I was doing photography mostly, and I was rocking with the Canon M50, which was a really stellar mirrorless camera at the time. And you know, it held up for what I was using it for, which was mostly photography. But as I realized, and as time went on, I realized that I started doing less and less of photography and started to do more and more things that revolved around video. And so I was looking at a camera that only prioritized video and didn't really cater towards photography as much. And that's when the set caught my eye. And at the time when it first launched, there weren't any competitors in. And so, you know, this was really a no-brainer if you had the money for it, which I didn't. So another thing that really stood out to me when I purchased this last year is that after 5 years or so, this camera still is being sold by Blackmagic at its initial launch price of $12.95. And I was at first like, what the heck? You know, why aren't they dropping their prices on it? But if you look at the support that they roll out for this camera, to this day, they're still pushing out updates. They haven't left this camera behind. And that is just something that is really awesome. Like, I really miss the time frame of when companies pushed out cameras every 4 or 5 years. And it impact as much as they could in the products that they rolled out, as opposed to just updating cameras every other year and, you know, halting the updates that you get for the current camera that you have. So that was one of the things that really attracted me to this camera, is the continued support and just the fact that this camera was solely based for videography. So before I dive into the reasons as of why I won't be sticking with this camera, I'll of course give it some love in the aspects of what attracted me to this camera in the first place and the pros that I have experience using this camera. For number one, and this is something that I observed before I even got my hands on it, was that the color science that you can get out of this camera for the price point is just insane. Like, the color science that I've experienced using this is just a no-brainer. Even to this day, with the camera that I'm shooting with, I would say that I get a better color image coming out of this camera. It's one of those cameras where you can just point it at something and it instantly looks cinematic, just because of the way it just, oh my gosh. If you haven't tried shooting on one of these, just check it out and see what it looks like. It's an experience you won't forget. Okay, cut it. Now, of course, this isn't something that costs tens of thousands of dollars like a Red or an RE or so forth. For this to still give you a really great image quality for what it's worth, it's a freaking dope camera. And I really appreciated that aspect. With minimal adjustments, like just taking this camera out of the box and adjusting the white balance to the temperature that I'm shooting with in this room, I was able to get a really good camera to the point where I didn't even color grade it. I just shot with what was on the camera, which is freaking awesome. The second thing that attracted me to this camera was this really simple and easy to navigate menu system. I mean, like, come on. It doesn't get simpler than that. As opposed to the menu systems that you'll see on like a Sony or a Canon system where you have to tab through all of these different settings, it was just cumbersome, and it wasn't something that I was looking forward to doing. It's just simplistic, and you know, it's on top of that, it's a 7-inch screen. Like, it's a 7-inch screen. Who wouldn't wanna interact with the menu that's a 7-inch screen? And when you get ready to actually shoot something, you get to view it on the full ratio of that screen. So that's pretty awesome. It's something that I enjoyed about the camera for sure. Thirdly, what attracted me to this camera is the fact that you have the port capacity on this is just amazing. You have a microphone jack, a headphone jack, a full-size HDMI port, a USB-C port for storage, a locking 12-volt 2-pin port to charge this camera continuously, as well as a mini XLR jack. That is so freaking awesome. On top of that, on the right-hand side, you have the CFast card slot as well as an SD card slot, which is nice. And at the bottom, you have the slot for your battery or dummy battery, whichever you plan to go with. All freaking nice, like insane. So that brings me to the cons of using this camera. And for one, I realized that at this point in time, I don't need to shoot in RAW, especially because I'm shooting in a studio setup where I have full control over my lighting and the temperature at which it's at. And I don't have to worry about lighting fluctuations or anything like that. So recording in huge file formats like RAW, or whether that's ProRes or B-RAW, is just unnecessary for me, and unfortunately takes up a ton of space. And I spend time transferring the files from this camera over to my computer just to export them one time as a regular file and deleting the initial image, which it's an extra step in the workflow that is a bit unnecessary. RAW is nice, and it gives you, if you're doing something outdoors, then definitely that's the way you want to go. You want that capability. But if your only goal is to just open up the camera to capture some dynamic range by shooting in like a log profile, or perhaps you don't even need to shoot in log at all and you just want video format files straight out of the camera, well then shooting in RAW wouldn't be the way to go. The second reason as to why I find myself not enjoying this camera as much is, though, as much as I enjoy the menu system that you get at the back of it, it's at the back. As a solo creator, the camera 9 times out of 10 is facing towards me, which means the back of the menu system is away from me. And in my instance, that would put this system right against the wall. So it's not even a situation where I could, you know, constantly go around back of the camera, change some settings and so forth. But no, I would literally have to take the camera out of its position just to adjust the settings and so forth. And I found that to be a bit cumbersome. Now, there are monitors out there that allow you to do things like grid, focus assist, and stuff like that, so you don't actually have to interact with the camera too often. And some may even argue the sense that once you set your video settings, you forget them and you really shouldn't be making too many adjustments. But sometimes I want to play videos back and do stuff like that, and it's a bit cumbersome to constantly reach around the camera, in my opinion. The third reason as to why I won't be going with this camera, and I sort of brushed it off initially when I was getting this, but it's the fact that this camera doesn't have autofocus. Hear me out. That means, yeah, you set your manual focus. Perhaps you use an object that's going to be in the position of where you're going to be, and you do everything you can to ensure that that object's as sharp as possible, and then you cross your fingers and hope that when you record the video and you see yourself, that you're in focus. But you know, it's doable. It's not something that's not possible. I shot quite a few videos on this channel utilizing this camera, but it's not it's not the best. Like I completely get it for those cinematographers or whatnot that are, you know, doing manual focus and doing that out and about when they're, you know, just capturing stuff with their handheld rigs or so forth. But from the perspective of just a talking head video and being able to do product reviews by, you know, pushing something close to the camera and having that camera snap back and focus on you, it's just something that I really realized I missed by not having it. You know, it's a really nice feature to have, and I wanted that feature implemented so bad that I even went the route of trying to implement the DJI LiDAR system on this camera to get that autofocus functionality. But what I realized while I did manage to get it to work is that it looked like a complete mess. You know, there's wires hanging everywhere. It definitely looks like I rigged the heck out of it. And that brings me to the fourth reason as to why I'll no longer be using this camera, and that is the size. When I did implement the DJI LiDAR system, while I did get it to work, that made this camera incredibly, the footprint of this camera was just huge. Insane as an overall look. It's a bit ridiculous. I didn't like the feel of having a whole bunch of cords going everywhere and so forth. It just didn't look appealing, in my opinion. Just this camera by itself, throwing on a lens adapter, the Viltrox, as well as a lens. While there are smaller lens out there, this is what I was rocking with, the Sigma 17 to 50 millimeter. This camera is just heavy. Like without the lens itself, it's a lot to hold, and then it's pretty wide. It's not a small format of a camera, which means when I mount this to a gimbal, you know, it's gonna be a little awkward to balance. It's not impossible. I've seen other people do it, but it's a lot of work to go through in order to get this working the way you would like it to. And so at this point in time, I find it is just not the best fit for me. I don't want to go through the hassle of utilizing a DJI LiDAR system that still, I feel like, could be condensed into a more compact setup overall, as well as the size factor that comes into play with this camera. It would have been nice if this camera came with something like a flip screen where you could still access the menu from the side or so forth, or see yourself while you're shooting with the camera in first person mode. But unfortunately, you just don't get that with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. But there you have it, folks. Those are my thoughts. That's my experience utilizing this camera for about 10 months. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the description, or your own personal experience utilizing this camera for a solo content creator studio setup scenario like I was using, and how, if you've been able to make it work, what were the, you know, what's your method of doing so? Curious to hear the feedback from you folks. But yeah, as always, folks, thanks for viewing, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.